My ex-wife, Sasha, was my high school sweetheart. We got married fresh out of graduation, fueled by youthful optimism. She was the center of my universe, and I believed we were destined for a lifetime of shared dreams. When we first tied the knot, we survived on my modest salary from a local accounting job while she worked as a secretary. Our life felt simple and sweet. I trusted her completely, never suspecting she'd betray me. But looking back, there were signs I overlooked. If I had been more vigilant, maybe I'd have seen it coming. Instead, I learned the truth too late. We were married for 6 years before everything unraveled. Sasha's boss, Marcus, was the CEO of a large firm known for his flashy lifestyle. Rumors circulated that he was a notorious womanizer. I'd heard stories of him lavishing gifts on female employees he liked, but I never worried. Sasha assured me those rumors were just idle gossip. She'd roll her eyes and say he was nothing more than a narcissistic executive who liked attention. I believed her. After all, she wore a simple wedding ring and rarely showed interest in material excess. I assumed our love was stronger than any temptation. The first time I suspected something was wrong was when Sasha began working late more often. She'd text me claiming deadlines were stacked up or that Marcus needed her assistance with important clients. Initially, I shrugged it off. She was ambitious and I admired her dedication. But then, the late nights became regular. She'd come home looking both exhausted and oddly exhilarated. Sometimes, I caught a whiff of cologne that wasn't mine. My gut churned, but I didn't want to accuse her without proof. So, I let my suspicions simmer. I told myself I was just being paranoid and insecure. Then one night, she left her phone on the kitchen table. It buzzed with a text from Marcus, reading something like, "Last night was incredible." My heart pounded. I felt nauseous, but forced myself to open the message thread. What I saw shattered me. An exchange of intimate photos and confessions of love spanning months. I couldn't breathe. When Sasha walked in and saw the phone in my hand, she froze. No explanations, no excuses. She just looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. In that moment, our entire marriage collapsed. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and too stunned to speak. Sasha broke down sobbing, swearing it was a mistake. She said she'd ended it, begged for another chance. She blamed the long work hours, stress, and claimed Marcus seduced her. I was in shock. I couldn't even form a coherent sentence. The betrayal cut deep, and every promise we'd made echoed in my head like a cruel joke. I told her to leave. She cried, pleaded, apologized, but eventually she packed a bag and walked out. That night, I didn't sleep. My thoughts spiraled, from disbelief to rage. A part of me wanted to destroy Marcus for stealing my wife. In the following weeks, Sasha insisted we try marriage counseling. She apologized constantly and promised to block Marcus. But every time I looked at her, I pictured those texts. My trust was gone. I felt sick to my stomach whenever she touched me. Eventually, I filed for divorce. She became furious, calling me weak and vengeful. She said I was throwing away our years together over a single mistake. The audacity made my blood boil. Cheating for months was not a simple slip-up. I told her I was done. I couldn't continue a marriage built on lies and betrayal. When we stood before the judge, Sasha tried to fight for alimony, claiming she couldn't maintain her lifestyle without my support. My attorney pushed back, highlighting her affair with a wealthy boss. Ultimately, the court agreed we'd just split our modest assets. We sold our tiny house, and I moved into a small apartment. Sasha, freed from our marriage, moved in with Marcus. I saw pictures on social media of them traveling, dining in upscale restaurants, and partying with influential people. Every photo felt like a slap in the face. I spiraled into depression, feeling used and discarded. At my lowest point, I learned of a massive windfall. An uncle I barely knew had passed away and left me a fortune. Apparently, he had invested in tech startups and real estate, amassing millions. I was stunned. I arranged meetings with financial advisors, cautiously optimistic about this unexpected opportunity. The irony was painful. Sasha had abandoned me for a richer man, only for me to suddenly become far wealthier. I didn't flaunt it, though. I kept working my accounting job, trying to process my new reality. Eventually, word got out through a mutual friend. That's when Sasha's texts started. The first message was short. "Hey, can we talk?" I stared at it for hours, debating whether to respond. Curiosity won out. I replied with a cold, "What do you want?" She immediately bombarded me with apologies, saying she missed me and realized she'd made a huge mistake. It was nauseating. I asked if she was still with Marcus. She hesitated, then said they were on rocky terms. She wanted to meet in person. Against my better judgment, I agreed. A part of me wanted to see her squirm. I wanted to look her in the eye and hear her excuses. Sasha arrived at the cafe looking disheveled. Gone was the polished woman I'd seen in social media photos. She looked tense, her eyes darting around like she was expecting someone to overhear. She confessed that she was pregnant. My immediate assumption was that Marcus was the father. She confirmed, then broke down. He had apparently turned cold, accusing her of trying to trap him. He wasn't giving her any financial support and questioned if the baby was truly his. She asked if I'd consider pretending to be the father to legitimize her pregnancy. My blood boiled at her audacity. I demanded to know why she thought I'd ever agree. She spewed some nonsense about how I was the better man, how she regretted leaving me. She claimed she never stopped loving me, that Marcus was a mistake. Then she dropped hints that my newfound wealth could provide a stable life for her and the baby. I nearly laughed in her face. The nerve was unbelievable. I told her I'd think about it, just to buy time. In reality, I was fuming, itching to see how low she'd go. Some part of me wanted revenge, and I saw an opportunity. Over the next few days, Sasha flooded my phone with texts. She apologized repeatedly, painting Marcus as a manipulative cheater who had used her. She insisted she'd change if I gave her another chance. I asked her to come to a counseling session with a therapist friend of mine. She agreed, desperate to prove she was sincere. During the session, she played the remorseful victim, crying about how she'd been seduced by wealth and status. She portrayed Marcus as an abusive narcissist. I listened quietly, letting her words swirl around. My therapist friend knew the backstory and took detailed notes. I acted conflicted, telling Sasha I wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again. She grabbed my hand and begged for forgiveness, saying she'd do anything. The next few sessions followed the same pattern. Sasha would express regret and vow loyalty, while I pretended to contemplate reconciling. Meanwhile, I hired a private investigator to check if she was still seeing Marcus. Sure enough, she was staying at his penthouse, trying to coax him into accepting fatherhood. She was hedging her bets, hoping one of us would take responsibility. When the investigator showed me the pictures, my hatred for her grew. I decided to confront her during our final counseling session. I dropped the photos on the table, each depicting her leaving Marcus's penthouse. She stammered, claiming it was just a temporary arrangement until she figured out her next move. I pressed her on all the lies she'd told, the false hopes she'd dangled. She broke down, begging me to understand that she was afraid of being a single mother with no support. My therapist friend remained neutral but watched Sasha closely. I felt a surge of satisfaction seeing her tearful, panicked face. She had played a dangerous game, and it was over. Outside the session, Sasha tried one last time to convince me to take her back. She clung to my arm, sobbing about how sorry she was. I reminded her that she chose Marcus over me. She spat back that he was the father and that I was too petty to forgive. That sealed the deal. I told her to leave and never contact me again. She cried that she had nowhere to go. I told her that wasn't my problem. I walked away, letting her stand there in her despair. My only regret was that I had once loved her. A week later, Sasha showed up at my apartment unannounced, a couple of suitcases in tow. She begged for a place to stay. She was worried about her pregnancy, worried she'd end up homeless. She said Marcus had kicked her out after another argument. I refused to let her in. I told her bluntly that we were done. If she needed help, she should contact social services or her family. She wailed that she couldn't believe I'd become so cruel. I reminded her I wasn't the one who cheated. She stormed off, cursing me through her tears, slamming the door behind her. Days passed, and I heard nothing from her. I assumed she'd found another couch to crash on or return to Marcus. Then one evening, I got a call from Marcus himself, demanding that I publicly acknowledge fatherhood of Sasha's baby. He said her accusations were damaging his business reputation. She'd told people he abandoned her and refused paternity. Investors were pulling out and rumors were circulating. I laughed, reminding him that Sasha was his responsibility. He threatened legal action, which was laughable. The baby was his, not mine. I hung up, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction that karma was hitting back. Meanwhile, I began exploring business opportunities with my inheritance. I invested in a small startup and started traveling occasionally for networking. Each day felt like a new adventure, a second chance at happiness. I reconnected with old friends and even started dating again. Though my trust issues lingered, I found solace in the fact that I was free from Sasha's manipulations. I wasn't naive anymore, and I sure wasn't going to let anyone walk all over me again. Sometimes I'd think about the life we'd planned, kids, a house, maybe a dog, but the sting of betrayal reminded me to stay focused. Sasha's downfall continued. Mutual acquaintances said she hopped between cheap motels, borrowing money from anyone who'd spare a dime. Apparently, her sob stories didn't get much sympathy once people learned the real reasons she was in that mess. Marcus's company took a hit when sponsors questioned his integrity, and though he wasn't bankrupt, his empire looked shaky. I watched from a distance, determined not to get entangled in their drama. Any fleeting guilt I felt was overshadowed by the memory of their betrayal. I owed them nothing. If anything, I believed they deserved every ounce of hardship they were facing. A few months later, I received another update. Sasha had given birth to a baby boy. Rumor had it Marcus grudgingly paid for a DNA test and ended up on the hook for child support, but he refused to marry her or let her move back in. She was effectively a single mom, dealing with all the challenges alone. Someone suggested I should step in and help. I refused. I wasn't the father. I wasn't her husband anymore. I had no obligation to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. Part of me felt sad for the child, but that was it. My focus shifted to personal growth. Therapy helped me navigate the trust issues and anger still simmering inside. I started volunteering at a local shelter, partly to counter the cynicism that threatened to harden my heart. I even dated a wonderful woman for a few months. Things didn't last, but it was a healthy experience. I realized Sasha's betrayal wouldn't define my future relationships. It was a painful chapter, but it taught me resilience. Whenever I caught wind of Sasha's attempts to gain sympathy, I reminded myself that she reaped what she sowed. The betrayal was never going to be forgiven. Marcus tried reaching out again, whining that Sasha's accusations continued to tarnish his brand. He offered me money to declare I was the father. I told him he could stick his bribe where the sun doesn't shine. That seemed to enrage him, but I hung up before he could lash out. A part of me reveled in his desperation. He was finally experiencing how it felt to be manipulated by Sasha. The difference was, he deserved it. He'd lured her away with wealth, thinking he was untouchable. Now he was facing the fallout of his own arrogance. I couldn't help but smirk. Meanwhile, my startup investment began to pay off. The company secured partnerships and the product gained traction. We were on a promising path toward profitability. I treated myself to a comfortable home and made sure to maintain a low profile financially. I hadn't forgotten how quickly people could shift their loyalties for money. I was determined not to become another Marcus, flaunting wealth and attracting toxic people. My close friends celebrated my progress, acknowledging how far I'd come since the divorce. There was no trace of bitterness in my professional life. I channeled that energy into constructive pursuits. Sasha attempted a final stunt when she unexpectedly arrived at my office. Security called me, asking if they should escort her out. I was curious, so I let her up to the reception area. She looked desperate, baby in tow. She pleaded for a private word. I obliged, stepping into a small meeting room. She tried to show me pictures of the child, claiming he needed a father figure. She apologized again, tears streaming down her face. But there was no remorse for the betrayal itself, only desperation for help. She asked for money, promising she'd do anything I asked. I looked at the baby, innocent and unaware of the chaos surrounding him. Then I looked at Sasha, the woman who once held my entire heart. The sight filled me with sorrow and anger in equal measure. I told her flatly that I wasn't interested in revisiting our past or forging a new future together. She sobbed, insisting she was a changed woman. I responded that change should have happened before she ran off with her boss. I told her to leave and never return. If she needed financial support, she could go after Marcus. He was, after all, the father. Her face contorted with rage, accusing me of abandoning her at her lowest. She called me ungrateful, saying she'd shared years of her life with me. I reminded her that she'd walked away first. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the walls. I quietly apologized to my colleagues, explaining it was a personal matter. Inside, I felt a tumult of emotions, but also a sense of closure. Sasha had tried every angle: seduction, guilt, anger, and nothing worked. She'd burned every bridge between us, and no amount of crying or begging would ever rebuild what she destroyed. In the aftermath, I found unexpected peace. I'd always feared I might weaken if I saw her in person again, especially with a baby involved. But I stood my ground. I realized my life was infinitely better without her manipulations. I no longer cried myself to sleep or woke up in cold sweats. My days were filled with purposeful work, supportive friends, and a sense of pride I hadn't felt in years. I let go of the resentment, but I didn't forgive. I believed some actions are unforgivable, and Sasha's betrayal fell squarely in that category. People on social media occasionally whispered about the drama, some labeling me heartless. But those who truly knew me understood the depth of Sasha's betrayal. I ignored the gossip. My revenge wasn't about public humiliation or personal attacks. It was about living well, seizing opportunities, and denying her the chance to use me again. Marcus and Sasha both dug their own holes by lying and manipulating. Now they could suffer the consequences. I moved forward, forging relationships built on respect and honesty. Watching them flail in the toxic mess they created was more satisfying than any petty act of retaliation. As the months passed, Sasha faded from my thoughts. My startup flourished, and I found genuine happiness in simple daily routines. I explored hobbies like cooking, hiking, and eventually tried online dating again. I was careful, but I met a warm-hearted, independent woman who treated me like an equal. My past no longer defined me. Whenever I glimpsed Sasha's name in passing, I felt nothing but a slight pang of distant hurt. I owed her no forgiveness. Instead, I found a deeper sense of self-worth, knowing I had survived betrayal and emerged stronger. That was the best revenge possible. In the end, I never forgave Sasha for her disloyalty. She and Marcus paid the price for their deceit: a shattered reputation, a broken relationship, and a lifetime of regret. Meanwhile, I found not just financial security, but emotional stability. My heart is guarded, yet open to genuine love, free of lies. I see now that my loyalty was wasted on someone who valued flashy illusions over true partnership. That painful lesson shaped me into a wiser man. I'm sharing this here because sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't an explosive confrontation. It's living well and refusing to be used again.